Welcome to OPAC. We're going to start with prayer, and then Paul Kelly is going to lead our pledge. So, Paul, let's everyone stand. We'll open in prayer, and then have a pledge. Father, we come before you in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, our Creator, our Savior, our Redeemer. And we bow our knees before Him, and we come before you asking for your wisdom as we discussed issues of government and politics, and we ask for your wisdom that we might please you and glorify you in all we do. We thank you for the food you provided and ask you would bless that. And Lord, bless this meeting and all of the speakers. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Attention to colors, hand salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hey Bob, make a quick announcement. If anybody's on Wi-Fi, you can get off.
All right, I would like to ask if anybody is on Wi-Fi, if you would get off, because we are face streaming live here, and I want to welcome our Facebook friends who are watching by Facebook all over the state of Oklahoma to OPAC. And by the way, if you want to start an OPAC group in your town, get in touch with us. We're at OCP's OPAC.us. And I'm curious, how many here?
Turn it off.
Please off. Yes. If it's yes.
Yeah, turn your Wi-Fi's off because you're
again.
using the bandwidth of the room. Are we using it? Yeah. So I'm curious, how many of you in this room got a phone call, a robocall about a pharmaceutical bill? It's actually 2632, a pharmaceutical bill that, according to the phone call, is going to raise your pharmaceutical rates. I think they mentioned Donald Trump's name in the phone call. How many got that call? Just only a couple. Okay, well, I got the call, so it asked if do you want to talk to your representative, so I push yes. And so there I'm at Rob Standridge's office talking to Sharon, and found out that this is a bill that significantly reduces the rates you pay for pharmaceuticals. So the yes vote, as you already know, is the right Christian and conservative vote, and the other is the vote, and Rob thinks is probably paid for by the Oklahoma Chamber of Commerce because they have so much pharmaceutical support for the Oklahoma Chamber. This is just awful, And to infer that Donald Trump even knows about this bill is just amazing. But so I was curious. We have again Stephen Black with us, who has updates on what's going on with HR 5 in the House. Evidently, it's going well. We know it's going to come to the floor eventually. And so, Steve, would you come up and talk to us about HR 5?
So I have some handouts again here today. The reality is that this is going to more than likely pass as a resolution in the House of Representatives. There was a committee meeting, and they videotaped those, and I was watching Tom Cole, my representative in Norman. I live in Cleveland County, Oklahoma City, and they're him-hawing around about the information of this bill, and I'm like, wow, you know, what's the posturing and posing around this? Just say this is completely unconstitutional. If I was a representative in that committee, there's no way I'm voting for this. This is completely unconstitutional. End of story. This bill needs to be, or resolution needs to be scrapped. And because this will ultimately give way to the idea of the orientation of pedophilia being normalized as an LGBTQ, and that plus sign, as I've mentioned, as a legitimate orientation as the APA moves forward to describing pedophilia as minor attracted people and or youth attracted persons, prepubescent and postpubescent legitimate orientations. And so that's where we are. But again, I think it's really important on the back of this handout that we get this thing killed in the Senate. And we need to be burning down the phone lines to Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham, but the whole list of those who will be reviewing this on the Senate side, it's S-788. It's not on this particular document. Next week we'll have an update version of this that'll have that information, but their phone numbers and the list of people are on this right here. So it is important. My friend in here, I'm sorry, what was your name again? In the white, yeah? Stephanie. I should remember that. Stephanie asked me a question a minute ago, and I think it's not something I don't think I've ever covered, which was, what does the Q stand for? It used to be that it would be QQ, which was questioning and queer. Now, it used to be, and when I grew up, queer was a derogatory term. But now it's actually the Q actually stands for queer. And we even have Christian organizations now, connected even with leaders in the Gospel Coalition, that gave a conference this last summer, and they're getting ready to do another one in June, where they proposed the idea of queer Christians. Can't make this stuff up. Okay? So they are continuing to move forward with the idea that there is queer treasure in heaven, that queer theory and theology is a good thing. And when you start looking at all the connections with the Southern Baptists and the Presbyterian Church of America, connections to the Revoice Conference, it's outrageous. So it's not only is it happening at the federal level through legislation to move forward of normalizing LGBTQ, it's happening in the church. And I just thought with Stephanie's question today about what is that Q, what does it mean, that you all should hear it. That is what is being actually propagated to our young people. So Bob, thank you for the opportunity to share.
Well, thank you, Steve. Certainly an Oklahoma treasure, and I think a national treasure. I so much appreciate that. I would encourage everyone to call everybody on that handout he's giving. And you might ask your pastor, if he never speaks on this from the pulpit, discuss with him what his thoughts are. And it might be time to get a pastoral search committee together or find another church. But this is just awful. And we do know that politics is downstream from culture. Culture is downstream from our pulpits. And we need a major renewal today in our pulpits and in our pews. So, without further ado, let's have Charlie Meadows, our founder, president emeritus, and his famous rants. Charlie Meadows.
Thank you, Bob. What I wanted to rant about today is a bill that Governor Stitt just signed into law here, which extends tax credits for conversions to CNG or propane, butane, any of those liquefied gases, or credits for people who put in stations and such as that. Just a little background, a few years ago when gasoline was up around $4 a gallon, there was a huge push to see people convert their vehicles to CNG, compressed natural gas. And it certainly made sense, but in recent years when gasoline has been so inexpensive here, that market has just dried up. And really there was never any market to it to start with. But it was an attempt by government to create a market for the benefit of and at the behest of the natural gas industry in the state of Oklahoma, which is a huge industry here. Not against it. I'm not against people having that. I'd just like to see them pay for it out of their own pocket. You have to understand what a market means. The definition of a market means that there's enough demand for a product or service that someone in the free market will go out and provide that and be able to garner enough money for the service or product that they build to pay all of their bills and have a little left over for profit. If they can't do that, there's not a market for it. And so many times government, in their fascist ideas of control, want to create markets when there isn't one. So this one did some things here. This is $20 million. That's not pocket change.
No, it's not.
Okay? Now it changed some things. Now there's a limit. If you want to switch your vehicle to CNG, there's only $5,500 available for you. However, if the vehicle weighs over 26,000 pounds, there's $50,000 available to you. Okay? And then there's money available also if you want to put in a CNG filling station, or even one that would provide electricity, quick refill for electricity. At the end of the article it says this, and this is the point that I want to make. This is a quote from a group of people in the industry who back this. Industry would be those who do the conversions, who provide the filling stations and things. It says, I believe this tax credit has done exactly what the state created it to do. Create a new market for Oklahoma natural gas, both in Oklahoma as well as nationally. Create jobs by the investment of private money in Oklahoma and help clean up our environment. Larry Williamson of Broken Arrow, the owner of a CNG-powered Honda Civic, told Stitt in a letter, quote, this bill does not provide a subsidy to anyone. It merely allows taxpayers to keep more of their own money if they will invest in an activity beneficial to the state. Now, I'm sorry, folks. Do you understand the difference between a tax deduction and a tax credit? A tax deduction is something that you say buy and that's deductible, and so there's a pretty small effect on your taxes. We've got a man here that's an expert on this. Whereas a tax credit is a huge check back to you. And if we're going to allow people to give definitions of what's not a subsidy, and our governor buys that, that's really sad. You know, the reality is there are some very good businessmen. I would say Governor Stitt was a very good, successful businessman. But a lot of very good businessmen are really ignorant when it comes to economics. And you could take maybe the former CEO of Sonic, a very successful businessman, but an ultra-leftist that carried the register or filing papers for Bill Clinton twice and was a huge supporter of Barack Obama and others. I wouldn't call either one of those good economists, and I wouldn't call anyone that supported them very good about economics. So just remember, a free market is one where there's enough demand that a person can lay out the capital to provide the service or the product, that there's enough people want it that will purchase that where that entity can make a profit. All you have to do is look at the new, what are they called in Oklahoma City, the new train things, the trolleys that go around? You know, that is financially one of the biggest boondoggles Oklahoma City has ever done. It will never be anything but that. And the reality of it is the advocates of it want it expanded. And so if it's expanded, it will be an even bigger boondoggle. But I'm seeing more and more people writing letters to the editor that are actually being published by the Oklahoman. If you want to expand this, after seeing those cars empty so many times and running way below what their hoped for projection would be, to make a whopping $50 million, 50,000 riders, 500,000 riders a year at $1 a ride, that's $500,000. How close do you think $500,000 a year will come to paying for all the expenses, repair and operational? not even close, and they're not even close to having that type of ridership. So no market for that, but somebody wanted it, and so we've got it. So it's heavily subsidized by everyone that shops in Oklahoma City.
Thank you, Charlie. Well done, as always.
Thank you, Charlie.
Well, our special speaker today is Steve Anderson, who's had an amazing career. He is very astute in the field of economics and has worked with the Koch Foundation and many other places, traveled the nation, figuring out tough economic issues. So Steve is here today to talk about the rural hospital bill. And Steve, I think you're going to be behind the podium, and I think hopefully this is adjusted for your height. But if you would, give a good OPAC welcome to Steve Anderson.
This is not the normal sort of subject we talk about at OPAC, but those of you that understand what we're on the edge of, which is a ballot initiative for statewide Medicaid expansion. And I think when you see how this is interrelated, you'll see there's a reason why I think this is a much preferable alternative. And as a conservative, one of the things that's always been wrong with Medicaid, if you've been around it, and I've been around it for a long time, ever since Governor Keating signed me to do some work on it, is that it is a one-size-fits-all approach. And that's what's wrong with statewide Medicaid expansion, other than it's a money grab too. But we'll just go through kind of some of the reasons that the crisis is real in the rural areas. You can read these articles and see what's going on. And you kind of think, well, you know, the problem is there's not enough people out there. That is part of the problem. There has been a movement to the urban areas. But when you understand Oklahoma's economy, if you want to go to the balance sheet and look at it, where is your oil and gas production? It's in the rural areas. Your ag production, it's in the rural areas. And if we let those hospitals go under, those towns disappear. And what happens? We end up, and if you've looked at the state budget, and most people don't spend a lot of time digging into the consolidated annual financial report, but if you do, you're going to see a bunch of funds going out, things called REAP, which is the Rural Economic Access Program. It was to make up for the loss of base sales tax in those towns. Because you have to understand the rural infrastructure that built up and was financed back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s was based on sales tax. Now, think about it, though most of us here are old enough to remember, there was a major car dealer, at least one, in every town. There was an implement dealer. There was a sales tax base. There no longer is a sales tax base. That has moved out. You know, you go to a major city now to buy a car. In fact, to buy an implement, you usually go to a regional city. It's not as it used to be, so we've been trying to make up for generations almost. We're 2 generations removed from those days when they had sufficient sales tax base to support their infrastructure. And actually, the interesting part is there's an easy solution. One of the things that right after 9/11, Keating assigned me to get into studying Medicaid and see if there's anything we could do. And one of the things I discovered in reading CMS regulations, because I'd spent most of my life reading tax code and the sort of things that government writes. And looking at it, I found that you could match local funds that were taxed strictly for the purpose of health care. So if you have a sales tax or property tax that goes to your local hospital, to your county health department, to your emergency medical services, those all qualify. You could make a match and bring the Medicaid funds in. So we know it's possible. We did it right after 9/11. I think we pulled down 12 million total. Now, I know that some of you are going, well, we're pulling down federal funds. Quite frankly, they're going to pull it down regardless. And it may actually become quite a bit larger. Statewide Medicaid expansion will be much more expensive than this because these are existing funds. There's not no one new tax dollar we're talking about here. And we're talking, when I say tens of millions in the slide, if you count the county health departments, it could be we're getting closer to 100 million that's out there. And there's an awful lot of services that are not available in the rural area. And that's one of the things that this would allow. It would allow hospitals to finally provide a wider range of services, because most of these would have to be new services added on in order to actually pull that money down. It isn't that it's just free money that flows to you. You have to actually provide a service. And when you look at the demographics of our rural areas, which they're an aging population, it is a high-cost population as far as health care. I'll let you read the slides. Nothing worse than somebody read the slide to you. You can do that on your own. Now, what this does do is allows you to integrate health care too. And that's one of the things, when we do these massive federal programs, we often lose tracks of efficiencies. If we drill back down to the local level, because the place of conservatives, we always talk about local control. Had Medicaid started as a local control program, I suspect it would be costing us a lot less. You know, Medicaid isn't as good at preventive care because of the volume of people they handle. When you get at the local area, let's face it, when you're in a small town, you pass a tax on yourself, which that's what this requires. This is all tax that people have voted on themselves. You watch how that tax is spent. You've got a lot better view. As a taxpayer to the state, do you have any idea how your Medicaid dollars are spent? You know, you lose track of it once it goes into that big state hopper. At the local level, they do an awful lot better job of watching what happens with their infrastructure dollars, anything that's being done in a town. If you've ever done local politics, and I know Charlie said on the Logan County Hospital Board at one time, he will tell you there's some scrutiny. And that's one of the things you get by bringing things back to the local. And that's what this bill was designed to do. It's designed to circumvent the idea that we need a one-size-fits-all statewide Medicaid expansion. Here's a few more things that it does. It allows you to then bring your county health department, your emergency medical services, and your hospital can all integrate their services together. You know, what we see in some of the rural areas, and I grew up rural, is that if you lose your hospital or your hospital specialist move, you don't even have a general practitioner, you've got at best a PA. If you have a heart attack, you know, I lost one of my grandfathers, he was 35 minutes from the closest hospital. There just isn't anything you can do in a situation like that. You lose your county hospital, all of a sudden you're at risk, and who's going to move a business there? I think you can read some of the things you can do with it. And you'd be surprised. I think I was looking at Texas County, and there was $252,000 of money for the county health department, for example, that went in. That would be matchable money now under this. Now it flows to the State Department of Health, and I think we're all familiar with the State Department of Health, which has their own issues. And I could give you quite a presentation on that sometime. There's some things there that's a long story about what we call marginal competence. Now, who opposes this? You'd think no one would oppose this. Well, you'd be surprised who's working the halls against it. It passed the House 95-3. It got to the Senate, and all of a sudden we're stymied. The Hospital Association is working against it. Now, does that make sense? They're working against their own rural hospitals. Now, why would they do that? Because they want statewide Medicaid expansion. I met with the executive director when this bill first started its way through the House, explaining this is how we could save those rural hospitals. And I'll be quite frank with you. What I sensed was, because the first thing she brought up to me, well, how is this better than statewide Medicaid expansion? It's better in a lot of ways, and we explained them to her, but I think the crisis in the rural health care areas is how they're going to try to sell statewide Medicaid expansion on this statewide ballot initiative, which you know that's already been filed. And I'm afraid it is a pretty strong tool, because one thing about the rural areas, we will vote our issues, and if there's no other alternative, I fear that is where they will turn. And the beauty of this versus statewide Medicaid expansion is that statewide Medicaid expansion is eligibility expansion. This is not eligibility expansion. This is just providing additional services. Now that brings the other group that might oppose this, that's members of the Hospital Association. Who's going to lose a little revenue? Some of the large hospitals. Because now those services can be provided in the rural areas. So the net amount of Medicaid money that will be brought to the state is not as great an increase as you think. It will just be allocated differently. I think what we'll find is that when you integrate mental health and transportation to those services and the local hospital, which the county health department is one that does your mental health, you're going to find a better preventative care. And at the local level, if we can build a model that works at the local level, maybe we can reconfigure Medicaid eventually. Because I think one of the things you're going to find about Medicaid is that when you ask them for outcomes, you're not going to get any. They don't really have any outcomes. Because Medicaid is not a healthcare provider. It's a really poor quality of health insurance. And that's the thing that we lose track of. Now, I've kept it fairly short because I think you had some interesting discussions before. And if there's any questions, and I certainly can understand if you have any, because this does look like we're going to draw down more federal money. And certainly, to some degree, you may, especially in the mental health area. But I think more will be a reallocation of. But please, anybody have a question? Well, we can wrestle with it. Or even a general question about the state budget, because I think all of this is integrated. One thing this does is take pressure off the state budget. As somebody who was a state budget director in the state of Kansas, and also a state comptroller, I will tell you a third of your budget is spent before you even start doing your appropriations. And the bulk of that money is spent in Medicaid. And if we want to look at what's squeezing your public education dollar, it's the growth in Medicaid. It is probably the most dangerous federal program as far as state budgets are concerned. And if you want to do some deep reading, please contact me and I'll send you a copy of something called Maintenance of Effort, the federal takeover of state budgets. And that's the most insidious part of Medicaid, is that there is what we call a maintenance of effort built in. Basically, they will never allow you to pull back once you start. And I think that's why you have never seen our friends in DC come through with block grants as we have always wanted. Now, let the states, as Jefferson always intended, do their own design of their Medicaid program, give it to us block grant, and we'll address our individual issues, because let's face it, every state's got different issues, and every local area in this state has different issues, depending on what your population's demographics are. Did I see one hand up? Oh.
I've got the mic here if I can get figured out how to, whenever my people's muted. Okay. Let me just ask you this question. Isn't there, or aren't there two different hospital associations in Oklahoma? One for large hospitals and one for small? Is that correct? Or?
Well, there's the Oklahoma Hospital Association that claims they represent them all, but clearly I think they're more the urban hospital. There's something called the Rural Hospital Association, and near as I can tell, it is largely toothless down at the legislature. I can't say we've got one iota of help from them.
Okay. Happens first. I forgot to say.
Yeah, I was surprised by that too, Charlie. I would have thought that they would have been more active for it. I think Speaker McCall, who sponsored this, the House Bill version, House Bill 1750, was really the impetus to get it through, but he does understand the rural issues.
I do remember my second one now. Many states
Hang on,
have
Charlie,
already-
let me give you the mic.
Okay. Many states already have expanded Medicare.
Or expanded Medicaid, you mean?
Yeah, Medicaid, I'm sorry. What has been the result when they've done that? What has happened? I'm sure in selling it to either the legislature or the people for a vote, they have projected certain things would happen. Have they been accurate in that, or have there been inaccuracies?
Inaccuracies are probably an understatement. I think the one that's been studied the most and had the most credible studies, because the methodology of a lot of studies is so shaky or so small that you really can't draw a good conclusion. The state of Oregon that had thought, well, when we add this, because remember when we talk statewide Medicaid expansion, we're talking about eligibility expansion, bringing new groups in that were never intended to be in. Medicaid was supposed to be for the needy, the disabled, the blind. They added aged for nursing homes after a while, and then pregnant women and children under age majority. were all it was supposed to cover. This brings in single men, those sort of things. So what they thought would happen was that emergency room usage would go down because that's your high cost. In fact, Charlie is actually fairly informed on this because when he was sitting on the Logan County Hospital Board, they changed how they ran their emergency room and actually reduced that sum in Medicaid. So you can do things on the local level, we know. What happened was they actually saw increased use of the emergency room in Oregon. Once you think you have coverage, even though they're acquired as a non-profit hospital, that's how they get their non-profit status, is to provide care for indigents. People were more incentivized when they believed they had coverage under Medicaid to use the emergency room. Yeah, I think we don't have the big enough studies back from the statewide Medicaid expansions in some of the other states yet, but clearly it costs more than was originally advertised. That is without any exception.
Yes, as I understand it, this is not additional taxation, it's just readjustment of the money you're receiving, correct?
These taxes have been out there, they've just never been used for the match. So there's no new taxes needed for this. This is just using those that are already out there. And it would only be in those local areas. The locals would have to design their own program, apply for their own 1115 waiver, and then CMS would have to give them approval. Now, it's been done in other states, but Texas has a very widespread 1115 waiver for mental health that's on the local basis. In fact, one of my old friends is an attorney that sits on one of the West Texas Mental County Health Boards, and he said they really, since they designed for the local area, West Texas has, as we do in Oklahoma, an awful lot of veterans coming back with PTSD. And he said it's been very effective because PTSD, as you know, leads to a lot of other issues, some drug use and things that also you end up in the hospital for. So.
Yes, sir. I appreciate your information. I spent 35 years in healthcare, and there's something that's really concerning me when I see the way things are going, not just in our state, but overall in the system. And so help me out here. So from what my experience has been, there's no magic health care that's paid for. The money got to come from somewhere. So there's this big pool of money, federal money, maybe, you know, that we draw out in our state. And then if that doesn't work, we have to tax the people to pay again for the health care, like in Medicaid. So I'm from New Mexico, and one of my friends called me, and he's a very nice, very calm person, but he was upset. And it seems that just in one day they had 1,000 immigrants come in illegally, but they picked them up, and all 1,000 were bused over to Las Cruces. They took them to a mission, and they could only take 300, but they left all 1,000 in the parking lot. So the other 700 went to the high school, broke into the gym, stayed in the gym, used the bathrooms, used the floors. It didn't matter. Somebody had to clean it up. But what I'm saying is, but they all had to be medically screened. Now, I don't know the last time you went to a physician, but your copay was $25 to $50, and you paid into that system tax-wise for a long time. So here we have, under the radar, we don't see it on the news, these same politicians that want to penalize us and not give the money to the states, the taxpayers, people coming in never pay taxes. Well, guess what? All 1,000, and now it's up to 50,000 people and growing. I mean, 1% of the Honduras population is here now. Did they ever pay taxes here? No, but they're coming in and getting full health care. They're getting screened to be sure they don't have measles, they don't have tuberculosis. We got to see, the thing is, we're looking at this and it's all good information, but we're just turning our backs on that because I think it seems futile. It's an invasion that our own leaders, quote, so-called leaders, they don't want to discuss it. They're not addressing it. And so you're not seeing much of that on the news right now because they're just tired of hearing about it. But it's happening. And it will break our system.
And it's not just in healthcare, it's also in education and bring their families. Like one of my closest friends is an educator in Gila Bend, Arizona. And it has a significant impact on their school system. And when we designed the nonprofit with the indigent care component in it, it was designed to take care of that small percentage of our population that is needy and couldn't afford care. Those that fell through the cracks, that weren't on Medicare, or weren't in the original intention of Medicaid, which we can kind of wrestle with the intention of Medicaid. I wish I could turn the clock back. 1965, Lyndon Baines Johnson invented maintenance of effort and started Medicaid. And it has been a drain on states, and as I say, I don't think the health outcomes have improved because of it. That's the sad part. That's what we'd really like to see, and I think that's the part that moved me most about Keating. Keating asked me to ask that of him. What are the health outcomes? And that's why I think that the rural approach, the local approach, even if it is partially Medicaid, is better because the local physicians, the local mental health care providers, they actually see their issues. But this was never designed, our nonprofit system was never designed for an influx of illegal immigrants. And I will tell you, it has swamped some hospitals in the rural ag areas. And I'll bring up another that, Milton Friedman always talked about increments of distortion in the economy. There's a distortion in our ag economy that until we deal with it, and this is a tough one to deal with, especially in DC. Many of you may not realize this, but ag has an exemption from paying overtime. And I think a lot of people don't. I'm surprised. Some of the top economists in the country I've talked to aren't aware of it. It creates an issue. We had in Kansas very low unemployment in our western part of the state, begging for employment. We had 2 pockets of high unemployment. There's a workforce development money in your state unemployment fund that we offered, I believe it was 2 months of rent, moving expenses, and your deposits for people to move from the pockets of high unemployment, go out and take those jobs. Those jobs were no overtime jobs. You know what sort of results we got? 0. Not one. Until that increment is fixed, that was part of the cheap food program of the 60s. It has existed since, and as a CPA or former CPA, I'm retired now, I could show you that if you are largely ag associated, if you run an elevator, a number of things, I can get you that exemption. So out in the rural areas, it is a problem. It used to be that that's what all we teenagers went out and did. You get a tractor license at 13, start working for somebody else. Once we got those labor laws that prevented young men that weren't working for their father from being on a tractor at 13, from getting in a pen with a breeding bull or a breeding boar, it completely changed the labor force. And if I look around me out where Charlie and I are at, our horse farms, we have a number of very, very industrious illegal immigrants out there. Because they're willing to work 70 hours a week with no overtime. If we fix that one, that would fix part of the problem. But let's face it, what really needs done is something needs done at the border. That's where the problem is.
If I understand correctly, if a person is approved on Medicaid, they can qualify not only for the nursing home, but also for medical hospital and still retain full Social Security. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that's correct. The nursing, nursing home, there's some income recovery and asset recovery there. You need to give me 5 years notice and I'll qualify you. That's one of the ugly little stories there.
If it comes to the adult protective services, they don't even need that 5 years, do they?
It depends on your asset situation, your asset and your income. Because there is some asset recovery because there are some tricks you could play. I haven't done the taxes in a few years, but we used to be able to, I could have put Donald Trump in it. I paid for a nursing home if I had 5 years lead time. Move everything to a trust.
Of the 2 miserable systems of Medicaid and Medicare, both being a socialist system, and I hate to ask this question because I'm ignorant on both of them, really, other than their socialist systems. I don't know all the ins and outs. But could you say, and I'm even embarrassed to ask this question, could you say that we would be better off to kill Medicare from the federal side and pull it to the state, thus it would be more local? The 2 misery level indexes, is that?
At least we pay in on Medicare. Medicare is partially paid for by you through your working years. So,
Am I playing and winking with the devil by saying that statement?
Well-
Pulling it locally, you know.
what I would love to see is local hospitals, local physicians, local pharmacists have a more liberal ability to do things within the system. I think that's part of the problem. We're always top down. And it's really your local physician that's treating you knows more than they do in DC about you. And unfortunately, these programs are designed, in fact, I was just speaking the other day to a woman who spent her career working in a Medicaid billing agency that did work for a bunch of hospitals. And she said, you know, the thing about it was, we had to have them do things just the right way to maximize their billing to the government. Now, that's not talking about doing it the right way for the patient necessarily. It's the right way to maximize your return. And as you may not know this, and I'm sure Charlie and I got an eye-opener because I served with him on that Logan County Hospital Board for a while, is the way it works is Medicare is the lowest payer by law. Medicaid is the next lowest, and then private insurance is above that. If you walk in a hospital and you have no coverage, you're charged at the highest rate. In general, there may be hospitals that operate different, but in general, that's the way they work.
But this technique that this gentleman talked about here coming from New Mexico, this matches the clever and productivity technique
That this gentleman that was talking about, the people come in that are illegals that flooded the system.
Yeah.
This matches the psychological technique of Clower and Pavins to overwhelm the system and to cause it to fail. Then that matches the idea of create problem, give solution to the problem created, which is a very communist, socialist, New World Order, globalist technique by the insiders.
And I'm afraid that is going to be one of the results. And that's part of why statewide Medicaid expansion all of a sudden is popular. Because you've got an overwhelmed system.
I'm Jim Martin. I have 5 offspring that are in the medical field, nurses, a couple of PAs. They tell me that the Medicare bureaucracy runs every aspect of medical care. Is that legislation, or did it just take it over?
I think that's more than likely it's regulation. You know, and let's make, when we look at the demographics of the United States, we are an aging group. You know, I'm the kind of the tail end of the boomers, but there's an awful lot of us loading up the system. And sadly, what happens when we load the system up with the illegals, you get ration care, and you get the top down trying to control the budget of Medicare with top down regulation. It's just everything about it is, pardon the word, ass backwards. Because certainly I think that the local doctors have a lot better idea. I think if we could ever make that argument, because I think there's an argument made for good health outcomes, lower health costs. I think that it makes perfect sense. We just haven't been able to play that out because we are top down on Medicare and Medicaid both.
Okay, my name is Stephen Black. I think that you may have just made a great segue to what I want to ask, because my question is kind of a moral, ethical issue. I am seeing in the Oklahoma City metropolitan area and also in Tulsa, I'm a live Oklahoman. And I'm seeing these medical clinics and hospitals and all of these different facilities everywhere being built, like brand new facilities. There's one going up or just completed in Del City where I grew up. So you have all these different medical facilities with ERs that are cropping up everywhere. Used to be, these major hospitals, right? And so I'm getting to the question, in these rural areas, there is, from my perception, correct me or instruct me on this, these places used to be called like Mercy Hospital, a Catholic mission. Deaconess Hospital, I think a Presbyterian, I'm not sure. And then we had Presbyterian Hospital, and we had a Baptist Hospital. And all of the idea of medical care came under this offering of really a mission or an offering of the church originally in our nation. And now they've been taken over, and this is my perception, a big business. And it's not about a good offering or even caring for people, it's about the bottom line. And so because, you know, our Democrat friends, they communicate that they are really for the people, right? They have the bleeding heart mercy for people. Why aren't they building these hospitals in these rural communities like they are in Del City, on I-40 out there on Douglas, St. Anthony's Hospital, which was another Catholic organization? Why isn't that happening if in fact these are supposed to be benevolent institutions in our country?
Benevolent got taken out of the loop when nonprofit status became. That's, quite frankly, Medicare and Medicaid, it shaped the whole industry. Now, you've seen a little bit of drift to something that in some ways is really effective, the Surgicare Center, which the costs are much lower. You know, their efficiencies are much greater. But I think the benevolent idea of charitable care turned into nonprofit, and buying that nonprofit through Care for Indigents. I'll discuss one thing here that's not extremely popular and little known. Some people would have me crucified for it. Is the way that indigent care is valued. There is one part of it, I actually read the Obamacare Act, the Affordable Care Act. If you read it, there's one part of it that is somewhat attractive to me. That is that indigent care should be valued at the Medicaid rate. What happens is nonprofit status is determined by a certain percentage of your care done for uncompensated care. It's valued in a dollar basis. By being valued in a dollar basis, it explains that charge rate between Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance, and those that don't have insurance. And I've always thought that there should be a one level of charge that they're allowed to charge for indigent care, which would up the amount of indigent care they need to do. In fact, some hospitals might need to buy indigent care dollars from other hospitals because they don't have enough indigent care under a system that would be valued in Medicaid. That's the one provision of ACA I don't think's ever been enforced. Now, the hospitals would scream if that happened because they have adjusted their whole system. I think when we were talking to our finance management, when we sat on Logan County Hospital Board, I will tell you, Charlie is a conservative at every turn. And even when he represented the hospital board, that was one of the questions we had, was why are you valuing it that way? And then when I saw their Form 990, which is a tax return you do to keep your nonprofit status, I understood. I somehow manipulated because you can inflate that charge, and obviously you can see that what you create. But what we've created is a system that has grown to this point, and it's hard to turn it back overnight. I think the idea of benevolence and charity is something that seems to have left us. We seem to think that's the government's job now. There's a reason that many of us give to our church. And in fact, I hate to brag about my church because it's so big, you figure we could do that. They bought the Walmart down, the old Walmart down on May. And we do have physicians there that volunteer their time to do free care, which there should be more of that. And it would address quite a bit of our issues. But I don't think enough is made of that, and it's hard to do in the rural areas now because there isn't enough income to have enough benevolence. I hate to say that, but that's true. A lot of it's been sucked out of it. Which, you make a great point.
I mean, they're saying that they're benevolent. I mean, that's what they say. Obamacare and all of that. But in fact, they're not. They're hypocrites.
Well, it'll lead to rationing of care. Any place you put socialized medicine, that happens. And who is the ones that suffer with the ration care? It is the elderly, and it's the young who might have some disability. Those are who suffer. And if there's any group we should look at, the young with some disability with compassion, that's the group. But in ration care, That is, and I like to point that out to my liberal friends, and often when you get into an argument with them and have that discussion of how rationing occurs and what drives it, and then go look at actual case studies. Canada and Britain are good case studies. It will scare the dickens out of your liberal friend. Because you know what I think we find with many of our liberal friends that are well-meaning is, as I told one of my friends just the other day, you're wrong for the right reason.
That's good.
Steve, let me throw a couple of things out I learned on that 8 years off and on the hospital board before we finally got it sold to Mercy, and jump in here on things. But one of the things I learned is this is really a cat and mouse game between the CMA and your hospitals. Your CMA puts rules out there, and so your hospital begins to adjust to try to survive according to those rules. And about the time they adjust and they start surviving, the CMA changes the rules again. So then you're back under that again. There's something called a critical access hospital, and that's what's in your rural areas for the most part, meaning you can never have more than 25 people in a hospital at any given time. If you ever have more than 25 people overnight in the hospital, you lose that critical access designation. This is why that's important, okay? It's because the reimbursement rate for Medicare is cost plus 1%, which is a better reimbursement rate than you have in your big hospitals in the metropolitan areas. But then there's another little problem. What is your cost? So you can figure up your cost and submit that for your cost plus 1%. But then the CMA sends in headhunters who get to go through the books to determine if you properly considered your cost. And by the way, they get a big take on that if they find you made a mistake. And so it's just a really difficult thing to survive in this, in this whole system here. And then another thing, we were told when we first got in there, that the key to being successful, the key to getting us off of that 1 penny countywide subsidy, the key was to have more people who are privately insured, because that's where the hospitals can reap some of that benefit. But then I learned later is your private insurance companies negotiate with individual hospitals on what they're going to pay reimbursement. And we found out some of these big insurance companies, like maybe one of them with blue in the name or something like that, you know, sometimes they, with small hospitals, will not give as much reimbursement as they will with the larger ones. And it's just a fight to struggle all the time. And then there's one other thing in rural areas that's a problem, or in the whole hospital realm, is you have to have enough patients to justify all the overhead. You want that to be that 15 to 23 or 4 patients every night in your hospitals. You need that volume. But guess what's happened in modern medicine? People are spending less and less time in hospitals. More and more procedures are done as out procedures. So that's another dearth. And I'll just say this, you take that hospital over in, what's the check town over in Lincoln County? Prager. That hospital needs to go away, in my opinion. That one needs to go away simply because it's so close to Shawnee. But you take a hospital in Boise City, if you don't have a hospital there, how far are you going to drive for health care? It's about 90 or 100 miles to Guyman, and probably same to any town in Kansas so really, that's why they're too full sense of their county sales tax subsidize that hospital, and they're still struggling to keep it open.
And that's why this bill wants to integrate county health departments and emergency medical services, because you start sharing facilities, you bring your square foot cost down and your administrative costs go down. And unfortunately, I think one of the big problems is we've got great doctors out there who've been forced to become pseudo-administrators and filler outers of paperwork. And that is an awful use of their time. time. Or they have to hire people to do that. They have a choice. And that drives those costs up. And I think what should give Charlie a hand, him driving the force that sold the Logan County Hospital, increased the quality of care in Logan County a great deal.
And got us off the sales tax.
And I have to say that my first day on there, when they asked me, say a little something when you first get appointed, I really made some friends that day when I said, I'm the perfect person to appoint to this board, because I live in South Logan County, and if I get picked up in an emergency, I'm going to put a gun to the EMT's head and say, don't take me to Logan County Hospital. Our lead doctor was not very pleased with me, was he?
We have one more quick
His
question.
name was Dr. Hothead.
Yeah, he followed me out of the boardroom. We had a private discussion.
One quick question. We're right up on 1 o'clock, but one very quick question.
Steve, my name is Jerome. Do you think in actuality that the big companies, the private companies like Blue Cross and Blue Shield and everybody else is known to man that's insurance for medical stuff, are they for private medicine or are they for socialistic government welfare?
I think actually you would find if you talk to them, they don't want socialized medicine. Because they understand what it is. It's capitated payments. It is a system that regulates it out. They'll survive in it unless they force them all out and say we're just going to have single payer. But I think you would find that, no, they don't want any part of that. Now, I won't say they aren't a cost layer. I'm very pleased with my private insurance, though. I think they do a good job. But one thing I do wish that I knew better the prices, because I would have my MRIs maybe done at different places if I knew the price.
Yeah. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Dr. Steve Anderson, thank you so much. Great job. I have a couple of comments in closing, but first I wanted to ask Henry Pitch with Americans for Prosperity. They were here a week or two ago, and they work also in this area, so could you just take a minute and tell what we're doing?
Absolutely. Well, while it's nice and fresh in everyone's mind, Americans for Prosperity, I do apologize, getting over a chest cold. Americans for Prosperity is going to be engaging Medicaid expansion at full force. We've done some research. It looks like right now, if we voted on it, it would pass. So there is work to be done in the popular conversation in order to let people know exactly what Medicaid expansion would mean. For example, no state in America has accurately predicted how many people would sign up. No state so far that has expanded Medicaid has accurately predicted how much it would cost. These are things we have to get across to people. There's a very strong but false narrative out there that we have to counter. So, just briefly, this summer we are going to be hosting a number of I2As. That stands for Insight to Action. It's an educational program. It's free and open to the public. For those who don't know, if you see AFP's logo on it, it's free. We never charge for anything. We want you to bring your friends. We want you to bring your neighbors. Of course, we'll announce this quite publicly. But I think it's important to arm people with information and have thousands of lobbyists in every single neighborhood talking to their friends, talking to their neighbors, making them realize that Medicaid expansion would actually be extremely counterproductive to what we're doing in Oklahoma. Right now, we're trying to put the ship on an even keel. Right now, we're trying to reform. We're trying to attract new teachers. We're trying to supercharge our economy. We're trying to keep our cost of living low. This massive shock to the system would absolutely be catastrophic to the very strong upward trajectory we're on right now. So folks, as we get deeper into the summer, I will be back with some dates, some times, locations, but I just want to put that on your radar, that we are engaging this, and we would very much appreciate your help.
Maybe you talk with Bob, maybe I'll host one here.
We absolutely would love to do that. We'd love to do that, yeah. We'll talk and we'll get something set up.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to know there are a lot of people involved in the battle today. Next week, Liza Greavy will be here. As you know, she's been a very effective leader in the world of anti-vaccines, someone we all appreciate. She will be here with a major PowerPoint. It's about a 20 or 30-minute PowerPoint. She has asked if you can bring a legislator. It's going to be a tough week next week because they may close down Friday, so they may be rushing through and having full days Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. But if you can get your legislator here, she would appreciate it. This is important information for them. So next week, and bring your friends, Liza Greavy. So again, I appreciate it. Steve Anderson, thank you so much. Great job, great insights. And I'm going to close in prayer. Father, we just come before you again and thank you for your grace and mercy upon your people. We ask that your spirit would move here in Oklahoma and nationally. I pray that you would protect us from the travesty that would result if this H.R. 5 went further. And Father, just give us wisdom as we work to prevent that. And I thank you for this group here and all that they do. And we pray that you would bless them as they go their independent ways. We pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Very good.